People who have signed NDAs that have now expired, or for whatever reason are no longer valid. What couldn't you tell us but now can? A huge part of The Bachelorette was scripted. The company I worked for at the time was a major tourism service provider and featured prominently in one of the seasons. We were all pulled into meetings with the higher up managers, given a spiel about what was in our best interest, and spilling any secrets was punishable by a $5 mil lawsuit. Please sign here. I gave zero fucks about the show at the time, still don't. Just wanted to do my job. The Bachelorette herself was clearly there to further her public profile or acting career. The scenes were always set up before filming. Behind the camera nothing was happening. The cast were told where to go, what to do, and how to do it. If half those guys weren't on their phones texting their real girlfriends most of the time, I would be surprised. So fake. So 100% fake. Edit. Well, this is getting a lot more attention than I thought it would. Here's a few tidbits. The NDA was only that we wouldn't spill secrets about the show before episodes involving our company aired. We were also not allowed to disparage the company, which honestly was easy to abide by, since we were treated well, and we had excellent managers. The Bachelorette has since gone on to a fairly successful TV career, hosting several shows. All of her official press credits The Bachelorette and her exposure during another elimination-style reality TV show with launching her career. I've worked with many ISPs at the past one, of which I'm still under NDA for, but as for the other ones, the equipment replacement fee, divided by 3, that's how much we paid for the box vs how much we are going to charge you if you're having a issue / something is broken, and you want more money. Just escalate the issue about twice for maximum return. Don't go past the supervisor's supervisor however, because while there may be a level above them still within the call center, if you hit corporate be prepared, because they are not required to be nice. As an example of the above, the story I tell is an angry lady who was out of service for about 6 hours. She was not happy with our get off our phone offer and escalated again. By so doing she passed on about $65 worth of credits, 2/3 of her total bill, and a going forward discount on her total bill. That would save her about $7 a month for another $80 over the next year. That was not good enough. She escalated past us, and the word came back via email. Her credit for time out of service was instead calculated down to the minute, meaning instead of $65 her new offer was now $1.12, and no discount off the monthly bill. If she attempts to escalate again, I was told, inform her we would take advantage of our service policy and cancel her account. Please return your modem with 30 days, or face a $99.99 replacement charge. On the TV show House Hunters, where they are presented with 3 properties, and must choose one, they've already chosen. In order to be selected to be on the show you must already have an offer in, and accepted on a property, and be in closing. It's a foregone conclusion which one of the 3 properties they are going to be moving into. If you watch the show carefully for clues you can start to figure out which one. Although they continue to fool me from time to time. Hint, boxes are a clue. If they are viewing a house that's full of moving boxes, where people are clearly packing, that's the house they've already bought. The other 2 properties may or may not have even been properties they considered during their search. They can simply be comps now on the market, or properties chosen for some kind of contrasting appeal. The debates on the show are manufactured as well. That's probably less surprising. The wife that wants a yard for the kids and the husband that wants a short commute aren't actually as invested in their opposing viewpoints as they pretend to be. Not that these issues don't matter to the home buyers at all, but the producers take some pre-existing issues and ask the home buyers to play them up as if they are more crucial or debatable than they really are. That's why you often see one of the buyers suddenly give in for no apparent reason on something they had been fighting for until the last minute. In addition to the fact that one of the properties is already a foregone conclusion, so there's really no meat to the discussion anyway. I know all of this, and I shamelessly watch House Hunters anyway, not under an NDA, just such a fan of the show that I troll message boards about it, and found a discussion by a family who had been on the show. That family had been under an NDA and revealed all of this. I'm pretty sure the company is bankrupt now, since it's been almost 15 years and the product hasn't seen the light of day. I was interviewing with a company that was working on a new design for a public toilet that was going to change everything. It consisted of the following: a pair of toilets, back to back. One would rotate up into the wall, where it would be thoroughly cleaned, and then rotated back down so the other, recently used, toilet could be swung up into the wall for its turn in the washer. The toilets wouldn't have the traditional water pool, but would instead have a conveyor belt that would carry the poo, and whatever else, back to an open pipe, clog free. I quickly saw that this product was going nowhere, so I declined to work for them, but sent them a 2 or 3 page email about the pitfalls of the design. What happens when the auto swapping toilet machine accidentally activates while someone is on the loo? How much more expensive will this be than a regular porcelain john? How hard will it be to retrofit all of the machinery and plumbing for the auto wash into existing architecture? You intend on cleaning a conveyor belt that has been exposed to human waste, plus whatever other trash that gets put down onto the unit. What will an open vent to the sewer smell like if you don't have the water separation like you do with a regular toilet? I used to work at EA back in 2013 as a game tester. When hired, we had to sign NDAs, basically saying you wouldn't disclose info about the projects you were working on. E3 happened that year and the game I was working on, NBA Live, got announced/revealed. All that good stuff. It was big deal. But they basically did a full reveal on it. Well, I thought it was okay to now say the game I'm working on on my YouTube channel. I did a game commentary video where I said like 2 weeks later I was working on NBA Live. That's all I said. I didn't give any insight to it. I didn't give any details, nothing like that. Well, I had another video I did where I discussed my job as a game tester. I didn't give any specific details on it or anything office related that I shouldn't whatsoever. Just kind of expressed what my day was like. Get newest build for our game, play it, find bugs, reproduce said bugs, write bug reports, check to see if other bugs were now fixed. Basically you could Google this and get what I said. I never said anything bad. I didn't disclose information that wasn't already known about. The thing I said about my job is just common sense. It's nothing like secretive. The game was revealed. All I did was say I'm working on it. But I feel like they were extra sensitive about it. BC it was the year the next gen, Xbox One and PS4 consoles were still in development, so we had the first dev kits and all that. So I feel like working on a next gen game, they took it more serious maybe? IDK. Well, week or so later I go into work. My project lead told me I had to go home. Like on the spot. I knew what was happening. I actually cried to him and told him be real with me. Am I being fired? He said he couldn't tell me anything. I get home. Hours calls me about an hour later telling me I broke my NDA and disclosed company secrets and information. I was fucking baffled. I said say what? How? I never disclosed anything that wasn't 1. Already known about, or 2. Simple duties of my job that's like in the job description of a game tester. Well, we argued back and forth. They told me to take the video down as a sign of good faith. I knew they'd probably fire me anyway, but I loved that job, so if there was a chance I could stay, well I took it down, and 30 minutes later they called me and fired me. I was really fucking bummed for a while after that. I really loved the job and the work I was doing, the people I was working with, the experience I was getting at that job. At the time I was going to college for game design and kind of putting everything I had into that job and career path. So when I got fired it devastated me. Fast forward to today, I have a better job with the state with good benefits, insurance, retirement and all that good jazz. So I guess everything worked out. But I do miss that job and the people I worked with. I really enjoyed it. So moral of the story, if you sign an NDA, you're better off just keeping your damn mouth shut about anything related to whatever you signed on for. Many years ago I went on a camp through a private organization, and we had an incident. That incident was under NDA. I don't know if it expires or not, but here is what happened. On the 4th and final night we set up camp at our campsite for the night. We'd traveled up to 20 kilometers every day for the past 3 days by only hiking, cycling, or kayaking, so we were all exhausted. Normally the people at the campsite in our group was 4 teenagers. I was one of them. 2 outdoor instructors, and somewhere between 3 and 5 support staff. This night we had about 8 extra people who worked for the company who sponsored the camp, because the next day we were to complete the journey at the boss's vacation house point anyway. Things happened. I'm not going to get into it, because I'm still in contact with the people involved, and it was a complete accident, and they feel really awful about it, and one of the instructors ended up with really bad burns down one arm and one leg. We were in the middle of nowhere, no cell signal, the office was closed so no landline. Someone mentioned the next morning that we should have just broken the window to get to the phone, but at the time no one thought of it, and even though we did have satellite phones, the only person who knew how to use them was a little too panicked to remember it. It ended up with one of the support staff and one of the workers driving her to the nearest hospital, which was supposed to be about 4 hours away. They did the trip in a little over an hour and a half. The instructor in question is fine now, has one minor scar on her hand no bigger than a penny, to show for the ordeal, but the company that did the camps made sure we were all under NDAs, because it was bad publicity. I used to work for a company in the Middle East that provided relocation services to people in America. We represented 3 main companies under 9 different names which changed every so often. When the reviews got really bad, we had receptionists whose main task, aside from damage control, was to write a few extremely positive reviews for each company every single day, in order to counter all the negative ones. I worked in sales. Our job was to catalog everything our clients wanted to move, and then provide the best possible price, while lying through our teeth about the service itself. We promised professional movers who had all the necessary training and tools for the job, great prices, quick deliveries, you name it. On moving day, the movers who showed up were often in unmarked trucks or ones with completely different names and branding on them. The workers were often immigrants who were paid under the table and had no experience whatsoever. The deliveries themselves often took a long time, and items were often lost as multiple moves would be stacked into one truck without much labeling of items or categorizing in general. As mentioned earlier, we changed company names fairly often as the negative reviews and bad press stacked up. Moving is a toxic business, and people will always try to undermine and cheat. This is something you should never cheap out on, as the money is well worth the comfort of knowing your move is in good hands. If you are moving, I recommend finding a company that is local if possible, so that you can meet the people who represent it and see that their business is legitimate. More importantly, they will be able to send someone to survey your belongings and give a more realistic quote and time estimate. Even if it costs much more than the quotes you receive online or from salesmen, it is well worth the peace of mind on an already stressful venture. Edit, spelling and grammar. I worked in the pharmaceutical supply industry from 2012 to 2014. We are a Canadian company, and in the warehouse stock everything from over-the-counter meds to narcotics and controlled medications. I worked in customer service and my shifts were days. My uncle, who got me the job, was a night supervisor in the warehouse. 4 black subs with garbage bags over their plates pulled into the parking lot and banged on the door. The staff inside ran to the cameras, and in the meantime these guys had bashed through 2 metal doors into the warehouse, except closed by a locked gate. A man pointed a rifle through the gate and instructed my uncle to unlock the gate and let them into the warehouse, or they would shoot through the gate at the staff. So he opened it. They came in, 12 guys, pinned everyone to the floor, and asked everyone who was in charge. My uncle was, so he had his forehead against the cement floor and a barrel in the back of his neck, and was told to take them to the cage, which is what we used to call the area with narcotics, pain meds, anxiety meds, all the good stuff. He let them in, and he was pushed belly first against the fencing of the cage with a small gun in his back, while these guys cleaned us out. They left the way they came in. They told everyone on the floor not to move for 20 minutes and set an alarm on my uncle's watch before making him get back on the floor. The whole ordeal took 8 minutes total. We were from a small town in Canada, where guns are not usually encountered. The 12 men gave zero shits about cameras, and seemed to know exactly where they were going, and what they were grabbing, and they spoke French with a Quebecois accent when everyone from around that town predominantly spoke English. I had to retrieve and file all of our inventory information before the robbery, so the police could figure out exactly what was taken, mostly medicated transdermal patches, and saw the CCTV footage from the warehouse. The conclusion was they were from Montreal, Quebec, and police believed it to be an inside job of sorts. Someone gave them information, a layout, a list of supplies needed, bolt cutters, and what to take, or they had done this before, as a pharmaceutical warehouse in New Brunswick was attacked in almost the exact same manner a year before. The company was conveniently sold to a larger Canadian pharmaceutical company 4 months after the event, and both my uncle and I moved on to other occupations. No one was physically hurt, but mentally, absolutely, it was quiet as fuck around there afterwards. You could hear the ice machine in the break room across the building. Everything was so tense. Either way, taking the transdermal patches was incredibly intelligent on their behalf. They can keep someone high for quite some time, they are discreet, they have an incredibly long shelf life, and are worth a lot on the street. Like, we lost almost $2 million in estimated street value, worth a lot. I'm still under the NDA, but don't give a shit, because of how stupid and annoying it was. A few well-dressed people came to my place of work saying they were representatives of a very important celebrity who wanted to come visit and make use of a large and visually distinct space on the property. We asked who it was, when they would be arriving, what they'd need, and how long they intended to stay, etc. They would not tell our people and only wanted to know if they could secure the room starting at 3 p.m. People higher on the ladder than me responsible for making these decisions eventually agreed, and literally every employee was made to sign an NDA and told that, when the then still unnamed celebrity arrived, we were not to speak to them or even look at them if we could help it. If we happened to find ourselves walking in the same hallway, we were either to stop and face the wall or duck into any nearby doorways and practically be invisible, like freaking scullery maids in an Edwardian era manor house. The waiting began, and so did the rumors of who it was, who could possibly wield such power. 3 p.m. passed, then 4, then 5. By 7 p.m., they still had not showed up, although their representatives continued to assure us they were on the way. The place had closed to the public by then, and most non-essential employees had gone home. I was one of the ones who had to stay, because of my position and what I'm responsible for there. By 10 p.m., they still had not arrived, and my coworkers and I were pissed beyond belief. Our respective department heads told us if anyone wanted to leave, they could. I did. Turns out, the big important celebrity did finally arrive around 11:30 at night. Drumroll please. It was Beyonce's sister. She evidently came, took a few photographs, and contact information was exchanged between her people and ours about the possibility of her coming back to shoot a music video there. That did eventually happen, I believe, although our building was only visible in 1 or 2 scenes. I was a moderator for Jair Online. This is a ban 3.4 spam, low-level trolling, low-level flaming, and other light offenses optional. Informal warning, a warning with a 3-day ban, a warning with a 14-day ban, and a warning with a permanent ban. These steps can be modified by the moderator on a case-by-case basis. Typically mods go with kindness, and it is entirely possible to never progress to the first 3-day ban. Your record is held against you for 6 months, but that doesn't mean it's deleted from your history. It is logged forever, and even after 6 months it can still be used against you if a pattern is noticed. The more you do the same thing, the less kindness you will get. You can also find yourself going up the tree faster if you are found to be misbehaving on a mule too. They will know. You can't hide. For sexually inappropriate and general inappropriate content, you can have 2 things happen to you. A very strong warning or a very strong warning with a 14-day ban. Either or, the next step is a permanent ban. 2 exceptions are sexually explicit avatars and names. Unless you've got a history, you'll get your avatar and name reset. You'll often just get a telling off after sexually explicit and explicit content is a straight permanent ban. All future accounts will be scrutinized, and even mild offenses will progress up the tree fast. You lose kindness when you do that kind of shit. It is possible to be forgiven and forgotten if you show you are contributing. This takes 6 months to a year. Special mention: animal abuse and child abuse makes you persona non grata. You are not welcome back, period. All future accounts will be terminated on the spot. You may also find yourself reported to the authorities. A tree can be modified by the mods on the fly. It's encouraged to go light on people, especially to new users, who can rack up some impressive records before the gloves get taken off. Now to address rumors and misconceptions. Site mods cannot ban, only global and up can. Site mods have a say though. They request your ban, and can even recommend lengths. Bans are not done by one mod. Bans are by committee. The site mod makes their request, pleads their case, and suggests the length. The banning mods then discuss this request. Then a judgment is made. Finally, one of the mods carries out the task. The requesting mod is notified of the results. Often the request is granted as requested, sometimes it's denied, and others are modified to make them kinder or harsher. Usually kinder. By default, most site mods already request the ban be kinder, unless the person has exhausted kindness. It's entirely possible to never go past 3 days for the same offense. Bans that don't require committee are for sexually explicit and explicit content. There are other offenses I didn't list off, but there are things you all should know. Will just result in a ban outright. An informal warning is still a warning. It's just one given. When the mod doesn't want to get you kicked out of things like heaven, or applying to be a mod, it will still factor into your punishment. Always assume the talking to you get from a mod is logged and will come up again. That said, sometimes a mod will just message you to cut your shit and won't log it. They will often tell you this. It'll be between you two, and they will not tell anyone else. Mods get items, often the MC and a little bit of gold or whatever. Frankly, it was not worth shit. I'd often just not collect. Nothing is deleted at all. Posts merely get hidden, and threads are moved to a forum called trash bin. Trying to find it with the forum ID redirect trick will result in it declaring it a 404. It's there though, hiding under the misc section. Guild posts are hidden, but threads are moved into a private guild. Oddly enough, this one is said outright in the guild RNG. It even says the guild name. The process of requesting an omni look into a user for things like trade abuse was called Soylent Green. And only an omni up can see things like trades. Private messages are private, even to an admin. In order to get into PM's, admin needed to log into an account. This is logged for even site mods to see. I've seen it used once, and even with my NDA expired I don't dare risk saying why. I've used a few NPCs for events. Mods were often given leeway in deciding an NPC's personality. For example, the rules for the principal NPC everyone loved were created on the spot by 2 mods who were using it to vent at users. NPCs didn't have special items made. They had one item, their avatar. Their avatar is just one item, and if you brute force you can find them on the marketplace. I rambled about something only 5 people will care about. Edit. Sir Aledine is the NPC I was thinking of. Edit 2. More things. So, mods have no tools for ZOMG. Nothing. Nada. You can act like a dick, and they can't kick you out. They can see the reports, but they can't stop you. Reports for towns 1 are ignored. Mods don't go in there. Reports are easy to fuck with in towns 1, and can't be trusted. The mods do have a tool to wipe names out, but it may be broken. There is a tool to monitor posts in real time, but no one really used it. The friends chat areas aren't private. Mods get a list of them, and they can enter them at will. They are invisible by default. They can bypass the password for the room. They can kick you and delete the room. No refunds on gold used. These actions are logged. In towns 2 mods can teleport to locations, go invisible, boot you with lightning. It also files a report with a chat log and send you to hell, which is a detention area you can't leave. Even if you log out. This applies to all games made with the towns 2 engine. There are tools for the other flash areas, but they rarely worked. Guilds are a pain in the ass and rarely do mods go in there and handle reports. A guild is expected to do its own work moderating. The cinema, or whatever where you could watch YouTube videos with friends, had my favorite tool. It showed you every room. So many pirated streams. We didn't really act on those, unless we were given a copyright notice. So I'd use the tool to find one with a movie or show. Just chill in there and goof off. The event where mods were overpowered sub bosses was boring to some of us. Being able to wipe you with one go got old fast. Site mods and up can see IPs. They can also see every account ever that used. That IP mods couldn't see guild posts for each user until around 2012 or so. Javier sent us gifts every year for Christmas. My favorite was a personalized gift card and old school Javier swag. One time an update to the shop's scripts broke profile tools. The fix was simply to change the style sheet so the one element wasn't set to hidden. It took them a month to do it. For a long time mods relied on a user script created by another mod named Leo. This let them do things like go to the next page in the reports among other things. Modding was just broken. One dev gave his password to a fake admin account. We had a mod get banned because her husband was soliciting minors. She later got into a car accident, unrelated, but mentioning it because still with her husband. A trainee mod once pretended to be dead. Fun saga to read. We used to do weekly or monthly calls to HQ. A team get together. That is until some kid broke into the calls and ruined it for us. This thread is the instructions on how to file a Soylent Green. It's written by Fish. https://www.gayaonline.com/forum/trashbin/ I like turtles updated July 19, 2012 /271,335,255 the title an location were to make sure people read it. Mods have a thread making fun of users who piss them off. It's obviously called the vent thread. There is also a thread for sharing bizarre reports and PMs. Mods have their own site feedback. There is a hidden icon Javier. Mods can see where you are on the site in real time and go right to it. Forums, guilds, flash areas. It doesn't matter. Oddly, I don't think a lot of them know they have this tool. Mods cannot post in announcements. I tried. I could move threads to it, which is how they actually work. The admin make the post in an admin only forum, bump it when ready, and move it into the announcement forum. PMS have a hidden list of contacts that only mods and up can use. Our mods, at ADMIN, and so on. Admin have at USER. This lets you mass PM people in these groups. Some site mods have Omni tools. That is because mods actually work the help desk, and they need those tools. They can't use them outside that job, though. Devs cannot do mod work, they need mod training to do it. Very few do. Uncle Kenny was a badass. I hated his wife. A mod account doesn't need to be someone's main account. You could also be a FAR at the same time as being a mod. My main was a mod and my mule FAR. FAR are basically a mod's pet. There is no secret gold general. As mentioned above, you got very little reward. It was based on how much you worked and the economy. It was called Payday, the tool that paid you, and it only gave you shit once a week. It was never worth it. I was poor the entire time. 99% of what a mod deals with is just edgy teenage BS. The rest is porn and gore. It is not glamorous. There exists a karma system. Every user gets a weighted score. If you have a good track record, it means you have a better score. This score goes down when you're given anything above an informal warning. This score determines how often you see captures, the rate at which you're allowed to post and PM, the amount and frequency of gold granted to you, and how much weight your report has, and so on. You see, your reports can actually delete posts and threads. The more weight you have, the more trust is given in your reporting. The thread deletion is hard to get, but post deletion is common. Mods still need to review the reports and the deletion can be overridden. I couldn't tell people what was in series before they premiered. Once it aired, you know as much as I do. For the most part there's still Easter eggs that are there, but most people don't know about, like brand names often being last names of people working on the animation. There's also stuff that is there, but people just don't notice. When I worked on some Dora the Explorer games, I did a ton of lip sync, which until then I never noticed she doesn't have teeth. I don't watch a ton of Dora, so I can't speak for the new seasons, and I'm sure there's probably some art out there where she's specifically smiling and showing her teeth. But I haven't seen lip syncing her. All of her mouth shapes intentionally did not have teeth, which is really weird trying to use for V or G sounds. I'm not joking. After doing nothing but lip syncing Dora for 3 days straight, I had a nightmare where everyone spoke only Spanish, and I had to translate everything they said to English to give them what they wanted at a zoo. I know high school Spanish. It was a very stressful dream. Haha. Aside from that, bloopers and things hidden on layers that didn't actually render. You'll probably never see those for most productions. If they did render, there'd be a hemorrhoid wearing a cowboy hat. Medical animations were super boring, which is one of the contract jobs I had. We hid weird sh**g like that in symbols all the time, and when other animators found them it'd be hilarious. The weirdest one I found was a woman talking while gesturing with her hands. When you went in the symbol, if you turned on the hidden layer she'd suddenly be holding a giant koi and tossing it around while she spoke. SGI/Cray was working on a Linux distribution in 1998 and had a roadmap to eventually replace IRIX with it. A fun side story. Around that same time, I worked on a project called System 12, later System 26. We had a gal on our team whose father was on Andover.net's board of directors, coincidentally, and had an inside line to how they were manipulating people the Linux/open source community. I tried to warn everyone as best I could, but nobody listened. The lure of cashing in on Linux was too strong, and everyone had a lifetime of student debt ahead of them. Most of the guys I knew cashed in quickly and took jobs out in the valley. I stayed put on the advice of my parents and declined the 1 or 2 offers I had. Simultaneous to that, Valinix Systems then became Linux.com, co-opted our project. We were trying to create a resource stockpile/repository for open source developers. A place where people could feature their code in exchange for participating. Van apparently liked this idea, and unknown to us, put a handful of FTEs on the task, who were already working on a fresh meat clone called cold storage. They put them to work replicating our idea without telling us, or them. They, the guys who were working on Vaz fresh meat clone, had no idea who we were. When we confronted them, the name SourceForge came from me during a phone conversation with my PM at Valinix Systems. I wanted to name our project SourceForge because I had just gotten my hands on a cracked copy of Sona's SoundForge and saw potential in the name. My PM/contact at VA took the name I suggested. Our team's developer Honeycomb idea, billed it as his own original idea, and sold VA management on it. Apparently. Once I realized how a little volunteer project and team had been brain raped/co-opted and shoved off the map, I called VA out on it publicly and was promptly disowned and destroyed in the press. By that point, around that same time, Red Hat was busy ripping people off, pre-IPO. They tried to buy me off with pre-IPO shares, which I also refused. Flipped Red Hat the bird just as publicly, and got destroyed a second time. At the dot-com days, watching a handful of companies come in and destroy the Linux community by exploiting years and years of altruism and volunteer work, all for the sake of making rich fat cats even richer and even fatter. Fun for the whole family. PS. Don't feel bad. I regret nothing, and IBM came calling a few months after that whole ordeal. Anyway. My mom was on a home renovation show. I was a teen at the time and camera shy was an understatement. Me and my brothers got the news a month beforehand, so I immediately planned a LAN party with a dozen friends. Luck would have it that it was a few weeks into summer break. The date came around, and the LAN party was on track. I had my priorities straight even then, but the production company wanted some before interviews and a few shots of us doing stuff, so I promptly complied and just as promptly fucked off when it was done. So 3 days later, and the planned filming is done, so was the LAN, and what I returned to was anything but a renovated house. It looked like the aftermath of a barn fire we had years later, though I didn't know it then. Materials and scrap scattered everywhere, cracked windows, some new ones dotted haphazardly around the main building, seemingly without order. The impression didn't improve inside. It looked like a set from an interior design show from afar. On one side of any one room, that is, the other side would have looked at home and fallout. The reasoning was simple. They only had 3 days and only required enough of each room to be done for it to look convincing on camera. This also explained why only some windows were changed. The floors weren't even done. The living room was down to bare earth in half of it, and the ceiling was open to the master bedroom above in 2 places. One accidental. They did pay for all the materials needed to finish it, and the certified people for water and electricity, but we eventually had to finish it ourselves. We scrapped a lot of the work they did and simply built better materials for the floor and ceilings as well as new lighting. Did customer service for a company that sold furnaces and air conditioning systems door to door. I suspected that it was high pressure sales, and it turned out to be true. Part of my job was to enter each new sale into the system, schedule the install, and get a verbal, recorded, confirmation from the customer. I was surprised at first that they would schedule installs for the same day. Then I learned a truck of installers, with various size furnaces and racks on board, would follow the sales crew around and actually begin installation once the sale was verified. I was initially impressed at this coordinated supply chain, as the installers and sales team were not actually working for us or for each other. Everything was on a commission/fee-for-service basis, with my company acting as spider in the middle of the web, coordinating and connecting sellers, installers, service, and finance. The sellers got paid half as soon as the deal was signed and half as soon as the deal was financed. Like the mortgage sellers in The Big Short, they had no skin in the game and didn't care if the customers complained later. And once the units were installed, it became much harder for the customer to get it removed, especially if they waited more than 10 days to complain. The deal that tore it for me came in late one night. I could hear the two sales guys talking over one guy's phone, and I thought something sounded fishy. The prospect was a 90-year-old lady who was clearly senile. I'm not allowed to book deals with people over 75 without confirmation from an adult relative over 21. When I get to the disclosure, where I read out exactly the commitment the buyer was making, which was usually a 10-year non-cancelable contract at $100 a month, covering install, equipment, and service, the salespeople are supposed to leave the room so that I can talk directly with the grandson. In this case, I could hear them over the phone, clearly coaching the kid, which was not. I had been trained. A loud point now. Some will be offended at this, I'm sure, but this particular customer sounded like he wasn't all there mentally. So I was very careful to explain everything to him, asking him questions along the way, and I could hear him asking the guys in the room what to say. So, as I was asking the customer a question, I suddenly said, "Pass the phone to Sam, Oklahoma," and he did immediately, confirming that the sales guys were in the room. I called him out on it and told him to leave the house and stand on the porch for 5 minutes. Then I went back to the disclosure. The guy kept saying yes, I understand to every question, so I had no choice but to okay the sale. However, I did flag it for secondary verification, which it's apparently passed. 2 weeks later, I get a frantic call from the adult granddaughter, who is livid that someone would make a sale to her brother, who was, in her words, not mine, a reffing retard. She is crying because the total deal was for $260 a month for a new AC, furnace, and water softener, but her grandmother only got $680 a month for her pension. To make matters worse, her furnace had been replaced with an almost identical system just 10 months earlier. And when the young woman wailed how could they sell her a furnace when they could tell the one there was almost brand new, I had the honesty and empathy to tell her, because they don't get paid for somebody else's furnace. Unfortunately, she called in just after the official 10-day cancellation period had elapsed, and there was nothing I could do for her officially. I advised her she would need a lawyer to get out of this. I don't know what happened, because I was called into the office a couple of nights after her initial call, where I was hauled over the coals for agreeing with the young woman, and for my comment. We listened to the sale, and while they agreed the guy was mentally slow, I was astonished to hear both my managers tell me they thought it was a good sale. My motivation plunged to zero after that. Before I was engaging and spirited on calls, now I was a virtual zombie. I was let go a few days after. Common knowledge now, but in early 2000s Hewlett-Packard would have their inkjet printer cartridges turn off, even though they weren't empty. Each cartridge was put in a machine and a memory chip glued to it. The machine would make all the nozzles spit on a piece of paper, a camera would look at it, and then correction parameters would be programmed into it. Some nozzles don't work, spit too little or too much, spit off to the side, etc. The correction parameters were read off the chip and the printer would adjust the voltage and timing for the highest quality print. It was also trivially easy to write disable to the chip after 4,000 pages, and it wouldn't work in any HP printer. To ensure high print quality yada yada yeah right. And of course, only genuine HP cartridges will work in the printer got taken to court and lost, which is why you can now buy much cheaper cartridges on eBay. But if you buy used printer from the right years it still won't work with cheap ones. As long as I'm here is my HP joke. Start with a $55 billion company. CEO and kronas get pushed out with golden parachutes because their giant acquisition of another company turned to shit. New CEO and kronas start another giant acquisition. 18 months later CEO and kronas get pushed out with golden parachutes because their giant acquisition of another company turned to shit. Point start with a $50 billion company. A very popular stem cell differentiation product used in many lab experiments was actually very contaminated and based off of bad research practice. Their patents should have been invalidated, and their research papers were definitely based off of bad science in a key area. Point that's why they hired me to come and fix their product. Point I did, and did it in such a way you could never tell there was a problem, except all the product previously sold. I taught them proper lab procedure and protocols. Kids, don't use incompatible lab equipment with the solvents you're working with. Don't use the wrong personal protective equipment with carcinogenic and mutagenic chemicals. Don't pipette of the reagent bottle. Don't pour back into the reagent bottle. Point however, I don't mention their name because their culture and people are toxic as fuck. I finished and got out of there. While I'm pretty proud of what I achieved for them, I don't want to associate with them ever again. Point the NDA was definitely to keep me from sharing about the contamination which plenty of researchers out there would be interested in knowing about. It's a very long story on how our boy discovered the difference between inter and intrastate that I'll try and make short. I was in high school, but pretty young, since I had skipped 2 grades. Who thought that was a good idea? I was in 11th grade, but maybe 16 years old. My school district, 6 or so schools, had a fax that each school had terminals and dialed into. I ended up connecting and poking around into what I found out was the electric company for a few states. 2 days later I was called down to the office, where there was the principal and 2 gentlemen in dark suits with sunglasses. I was questioned for a bit, and then sent on my way. I thought it was over. Less than a week later, I was picked up by a black Lincoln, and given a passport and student visa, driven to the closest international airport, and escorted on a plane to England. I did extremely well in school, and on my college boards, and was offered a scholarship in southern England a little prior to this. At Heathrow, I was met by someone who claimed to be from the American consulate who held onto my passport and visa and took me to what would be my flat while I studied. I ended up staying there for just shy of 10 years and had to ask for papers to return to the States. That was granted if I signed an NDA and agreed to work in a large grey building on feet. Meade in Maryland. I was able to read lots of different computer code, but I wasn't that accomplished. My job was to work with programmers, to explain my work with prime numbers and factorization. It was using a parable to better predict ways to brute force encryption keys. The NDA expired a few years ago, and I had 2 military men show up with a couple of boxes that were taped shut of my papers. I promptly got them in the hands of an attorney that specialized in this type of stuff, and sent the boxes, still sealed, to his office. Needless to say, there's a lot more that goes with this. My father was never physical, but was very domineering and verbally abusive. He passed away about 15 years ago, although he would never have told me what happened when I returned and was permitted to leave Maryland. My mom just passed away about a year ago. She was always afraid of him, and I should have brought it up in the years after he died, but although we did have a good relationship, I was always afraid she'd think I'd blame her for that and all the other things I grew up with. The only people that may have known were the head of the department and some of the professors I ended up working with when I earned other degrees, did my postgraduate work, and assisted in publication. They've all passed away. DL. Dr. Smart Alack kid accidentally gets into computers that controlled part of the power grid, got shipped off to the UK, where I guess I'd be considered an undocumented citizen. I was allowed to return and used to work on prime number theory to help break, pretty weak by today's standards, encryption point. Aren't you sorry you asked? I'd be glad to answer more in private. Although it's been a long time, I don't speak too much about this in public. I used to work at a pretty large photo studio that consisted of 4 studios within our building. They were big open spaces that companies rented out for all matter of photo shoots. One time a major tech company rented out all 4 studios for 2 solid weeks to photograph an unreleased product. They only used one of the 4 studios, but wanted the privacy lockdown point. They blacked out every single window and posted a security guard at every entrance/exit. The guards were actually all older, retired PD/military. We'd spend most of the day chatting about their experiences in the service. Really tough old guys. We could only come into the studio through one approved door. We had to sign in with security every morning, and they put special security stickers over the cameras on our phones. They'd have to be the ones to take the stickers off on the way out each night to make sure we didn't tamper with it. Point. I honestly don't know what the product was, but the main client came and left with whatever it was in a locked Pelican case, escorted with armed guards. Haha, it was actually a really awesome 2 weeks. Despite all of the secrecy and security, the client was really great. We didn't have anything to do, so we just spent the day shooting the shit with security and crew. Good times. The National Telecoms, Media and ICE, which was quite large in the UK, British Telecom. For years they secretly inserted their own adverts on the web, capturing the adverts by Google and replacing them. Before HTTPS was rolled out to many news sites in our data center, they used to also log and monitor all metadata they deemed relevant to push more adverts. Unfortunately, Google eventually found a number of ISPs were doing this and began to switch to HTTPS. Looked at NHS sites recently. You probably need medical insurance spam. Looked at car insurance. Maybe our select third parties can help. At some points they would try to log non-HTTPS usernames and passwords for other services in order to determine which customers were using which sites. If the internet connection was shared by multiple people, they would try to determine which user was using it at the time. It didn't stop there. They would try to hand over data to other parts of the business and to third parties to sell tree service, phone, internet, media, and quad service. Phone, mobile/cell, internet, media, which they deemed relevant. The furthest they went was to record metadata in phone calls. Called a doctor recently. Maybe they need life insurance. Called a loan company recently. Maybe they need a loan. Called the police recently. Maybe they need personal or private security or an alarm system. Those strange emails you got to your BT ISP email that you never used. It was your ISP marketing emails through the post you never signed up for. It was your ISP phone calls for life insurance that was oddly relevant to your situation. It was your ISP looked at certain TV shows on your BT Vision box or BT Vision web online and then got emails on buying the DVD box set. It was your ISP agreed to all of this in your terms and conditions, although the bits on recording your usernames and passwords was badly worded and could be easily drafted into legalese to mean anything. There were a large amount of strange practices. They got around a lot of legal issues with this, with routing the data out of the UK, doing the processing, and sending it back. Not sure if they still do most of this. There's a guy who makes a living by being a conspiracy theorist. One of his really far out there theories is actually spot on. We were filming an episode of his show when the evidence was delivered, and he was kind of going through it with his partners. No one could believe what we were seeing and hearing. Everyone just kind of stopped working and listened. In point, there was video proof, photographic proof, stolen sealed court records, classified government reports, everything. I remember feeling sick to my stomach and just full of outrage for some reason. Then he played the video that had outtakes of the event and some sketchy hidden camera shots of the actors going over their roles for what they kept referring to as ND, which we believed to be Newsday. However, 1 week later, people much more powerful than him forced all the interns, researchers, producers, and us contracted cameramen who didn't really have a dog in any fight, to sign a shit ton of NDAs and a bunch of other stuff they weren't NDA, but were led to believe would destroy our lives if we ever talked. They then started tearing apart the office and taking everything they could find. Not like anyone would believe any of us anyway, but it was just crazy to see it all play out and then finally see the proof of something you've heard may have not actually happened the way you were led to believe it did. Mine is about that sad. When I was stationed in Baton Rouge, we, Marines, would be asked to test their security from time to time. One time, another Marine and I were asked to test their security checkpoint. The manager, or supervisor, would give us fake bomb materials and give us 30 minutes in a room full of random bags and travel items to come up with a plan on how to get through the checkpoint. Nothing was planned, so even he/she didn't know what we were going to do. We would get a boarding pass like any other traveler and be dropped off at the airport. They would watch from afar and see how everything went. My friend and I were able to get det cord, sheets of plastic explosives, and other things through the checkpoint just by being able to talk. The agents that questioned me at the table knew they were being tested. They questioned me about why I had such a small amount of clothing and why I had a camera from the 80s. They asked me why I didn't have a toothbrush as well, which I thought was oddly specific. I was confident in my bullshit answers, so they let me go without much pushback. I had the materials to set off the explosives and my buddy, who was further back in line, had the actual explosives. They ran our bags through the X-ray and even did a physical search and didn't find our materials. We were pretty clever in how we chose to hide our stuff, and I don't plan on sharing that here, but it should have been found. We made it all the way to the gate with no problems. The manager made us go back and do it again because they obviously fucked up. This time they caught us since the manager told them who had the bomb material. I went to a rehab facility associated with a scientific sounding religion well known in Hollywood and mentioned in South Park. Some of the activities we did for hours a day: partner up, ask your partner, do bads fly? They would respond however they wanted. A yes or a no was to be followed by thank you, then repeating the question again. Any other answer was to be followed by I'll repeat the question before repeating the question again. The only question allowed was do bads fly? Reading lines from Alice in Wonderland as though it was a natural conversation. The person W/O, the book in hand, would simply try to humor the sentences spoken by their partner. Guiding your partner between two walls. Walk forward. Stop. Reach out and touch the wall. Turn around. Repeat. Trying to keep an absolutely straight face while your partner did and said anything they wanted to try to break your concentration. This is where the NDA comes in. When doing the latter exercise, the workers at the rehab were pretty consistent about letting us do/say anything. There was no censorship, so we said ridiculous things, offensive things, etc., and acted out the same type of content. Aside from touching your partner, it was anything goes, until I started mentioning stuff I learned on South Park about the religion this rehab swore they were not associated with. I was great at it immediately. After I mentioned some of the lore I had learned on South Park, the guy in charge of the group called me out. What did you just say? I'm just saying random shit for no particular reason. Okay, don't say that stuff anymore. Then he left briefly. Within minutes an escort arrived to take me out of this class and brought me to their security office, where they told me I was going to be released from the program immediately and not allowed to speak to anyone else at the facility. They had packed up my things and I would be allowed to double check my room to make sure I had everything on my way out to the van that would take me to the airport. I was kicked out for black PR. The NDA was conditional for getting a refund from them, as they had told my family they were a non-religious rehab. It was fucking crazy. I worked for a company that bought cell phones on eBay to resell. We had a program that violated eBay's terms of service. Whenever a new phone that fit our search parameters came up, it would alert and direct you to it. Then we would have a spreadsheet of what to look for and decide if we should buy it or not. It would have the price to bid up to 4 different points of damage. We knew how to determine quality based on photos and description. If the description had like new and it probably wasn't, then we could still purchase it as long as no pictures showed it in worse condition. because it would fit as false description by eBay standards, and we could return it. All of our description and picture judgment was based on what eBay's own standards were, and we returned a shit ton of phones. We also refurbished a bunch with minor damage. All the company did was hire county college students to bid on these phones the instant they hit eBay, then resell them at a higher price. Them, and I'm sure others like them, are the reason you can't find truly good deals for anything people actually want on eBay anymore. They'd also get an account banned every few weeks and have to make a new one. Everything was purchased on credit cards also. Honestly, I was never concerned about the NDA because of the sketchiness of the company and software anyway. It's just never really relevant to bring up. The company was called Live Wireless. So I did some contract work for BioWare for one of their old Republic expansions several years ago. Whichever one revamped how ships worked. I haven't actually played the game since shortly after launch point. First time it was about 15 of us at computers logged into test servers. We had a director and a developer. The dev would literally be in their own character to film us, or sometimes would lock his camera to one of us to follow. We did a lot of ship-based shots. Any shot of us in formation we had to manually line our ships up and count down when we all flew and to where. This went on for 2 weeks. The second time about 8 of us were invited back. We did a lot of PvP footage, both in ship and as player models. Different director this time. I guess he had done some of the Titanfall trailers previously. They treated us pretty well, and it was mostly fun. Some of the guys there were trying really hard to get noticed, and I guess get hired on full time somehow. One of them, I kid you not, had the side braid Adobe wore in the first prequel point. They provided catered lunch, and it paid decently though. I never did see the trailers to see if any of my suggestions. They asked us for input and we tried a few shots some of us suggested, made it in LOL. Was selected to be an alpha tester for PUBG, PC of course. The game had one map, Erangel. The graphics were crap, but the game was really unoptimized and still required a lot of resources. Animations weren't motion captured. Sounds was completely fucked. You could hear footsteps / gunshots / buggy sounds from hundreds of meters away, and they sounded like they're 1 meter away. The rounds would not start falling from a plane with a parachute, but all players just spawning in one small hangar in the middle west part of the map. The map's colliders were glitchy, so you could no-clip through certain parts of the map. Trees and other objects were also no-clipping through houses all over the map. But I still had a fun time, since up until then we only had Armor 3 or H1Z1 for that battle royale gaming experience to choose from. Also, in the end of the alpha, all the original testers like me were given free full versions of the game and the special Player Unknown's clothes pack, which I sold foolishly for only around €170 on Steam Marketplace. If you go to the official Discord server of PUBG, this is where all the original alpha testers were invited at the beginning, which were only a few hundred. We still have the alpha tester tag to our username, so we've got that going for us, which is nice. I used to work for a UK publicly listed company. They milked that for creditability all they could, called Armored PLC, Glasgow based. Their salesmen would cold call businesses, back in early 2000s, who would lie through their teeth about what search engine friendly websites we could build. They would literally find their favorite website and tell the client we could do it for whatever the price was. £200 was cheap. We would get the order through and build a shitty ass 3-framed HTML web page. Naturally the client would complain. The whole time I was there, they worked on the basis that not many would complain, they'd just suck it up. All calls were recorded. They made the mistake of putting me in charge of listening to calls and deciding on refunds. I was there for only a few months before moving on, but I'm sure refunds skyrocketed for the short time I was involved. We worked there not long after the Boiler Room movie came out. We expected to show up to work to a locked door with nothing but a chair with a phone on it. One of the salesmen got arrested for using the credit card numbers collected during the sale for personal gain. I cannot believe the place is still going. Edit. Just looked at their stock price. It started off about £100, dropped to less than $5, then looks like once their webpage selling scam created, it rocketed north. I was the IT/tech leader for a security camera/DVR company that catered to businesses. This was way back in the day when offsite/cloud storage was a big selling point. We told companies that our monthly package included something like 500 hours of offsite storage for up to 8 cameras. About 2 weeks in I learned that there was no offsite storage. If you used the app on a PC it would just connect to the DVR. The DVR itself was pretty stable and held a lot of footage, so the issue of people having to go back 3 months or something to pull footage off the cloud very rarely came up, and the owner would just make up something about it somehow got accidentally deleted and give them 6 months of free and non-existent service. Once a restaurant that had our service had someone come in the kitchen and stab their ex-girlfriend and the DVR happened to crash about 6 hours later. I was called in to pull footage, surrounded by cops and detectives, and had no way to get it back. When they asked about the offsite storage I had to make up something about our servers crashing. They did end up catching and convicting the guy, but easily top 3 shittiest moments of my life. I was desperate for a job, it paid well, and I didn't have a lot of options, but I found a less paying, but not shady job a month later and walked out. About 6 months later I got a call from a company that said they had bought that company and wanted me to come in and manage the whole tech side and were going to offer me something like $150,000 to start. I then explained how it all actually worked and they mumbled a thank you. By that sounded like tears/rage rising up and hung up. My old boss who owned the hot dog stand I worked at was a criminal and a defense lawyer. Oops, I meant to say a criminal defense lawyer who was disbarred for failing to disclose evidence in a murder trial. Yeah, so he owned the hot dog stand I was working at, and one day I walk around the corner and his idiot brother who managed the place. We'd worked 12 hours a week, but sexually harassed young girls 4 times as hard, so it would feel like full time. Is red in the face and immediately calls me a fucking moron. I should fire you for this. So I bite instead of firing myself, which would have saved me a lot of time. It appears that someone didn't turn off the burners on some of the equipment and the place could have burned down. I actually, as part of the closing procedure, call the owner and walk through the entire place going through a checklist. The moron isn't around the place long enough to know what happens after 11 AM. So he bitches at me for the better part of an hour till I get fed up and tell him to check the tapes. He refuses. He leaves for the day, and I check the security footage, and at 3 AM the owner came in, turned on a few pieces of equipment, puts a hat over 1 camera out of 9 and walks out, locks up and drives away. So I basically call him and quit, and show up for my last check later that week, where he informs me that I illegally obtained any footage of him attempting the failed arson. I told him that if I don't get my check today OSHA will be calling tomorrow along with several others. He makes me go to his strip mall lawyer's office and sign an NDA about how he is shitty at fraud and arson and being a lawyer and how he has 50+ CATs. No lie. The cat thing was a part of it. He was a completely ridiculous man. I needed the money right then, so I signed point DL. Doctor, some shitty lawyer owned the hot dog place I work at and failed at burning tea down, but blamed it on me. He made me sign an NDA about this incident to receive my pay. Finally, something I can truly comment on. Had to sign an NDA for a very popular hotel in Los Angeles I worked at about 7 years ago. Beverly Hills Hilton. Deal was I couldn't talk about anything, anyone, or share any information gathered or experienced while working there, and had to stay quiet about it for about 18 months after my termination. I also could not take any photos at or of the property, or on the property with anyone. Things they wanted to keep secret ranged from cleanliness matters, celebrities, scandals, suicides, murders, you name it, it happened. But discreetly point here we go, checked in George Lopez, who was so completely drunk and belligerent before his big comedy show that he threw up all over the hotel lobby floor and my check-in desk and threw me a $100 bill to go ahead and get that cleaned up. The head quarterback of the Cowboys, I don't even remember his name, during the 2014 season was caught by his wife, booked in a suite with not only 1 mistress, but 3 for the entire week they were stationed in Southern California. She came all the way from New York on a red-eye flight because another woman answered his room phone. Things got very wild. There was blood. Cops were called, point checked in a few senators, will not be named, and their wives, who I found out were indeed not their wives when their real wives also showed up. to retrieve a room key and were denied access because they already checked in. Whitney Houston. I didn't get to check her in as I just started working there in the back office reception. But that was a really hard time for everyone. A lot of people were not allowed to be booked on the same floor as her, and we were not allowed to clean the room for a few weeks. People were sick enough to come in and ask if they could be booked in the room she passed in. Whitney Houston's death was a big NDA form itself we all had to go over and have training on how to not publicize it and carry on. I didn't ever meet her or see her room until after it was reopened up to the public, but to this day I cannot disclose what room number she was in. I honestly have a bunch more stories, but I think I'll stop here. Pretty much where Svensk Infrastructure, Swedish infrastructure, quite possibly the shittiest company that has ever existed. Laid internet cable point, but also just how fucking bad, incompetent, and corrupt that company was on every level. My favorite example of this was when we, the newly hired personnel, was supposed to get a week of on-site training to learn the job. We didn't even get a day worth of training. All we did was to stand out in the pouring rain without any bad weather gear because the company was supposed to provide it. But, surprise, they didn't. The same goes for work boots, gloves or any form of protective gear, and wait for our shift manager to show up, which he didn't. The next day they declared our on-site training completed and expected us to know how the fuck to finish our tasks. But wait. There's more. The company straight up caused a neighborhood-wide blackout because one of our diggers cut off the main power cable, which caused the grid to the entire neighborhood to shut off. This is because the worker noticed the warning sign when he dug, but when he tried to tell the on-site boss, an incompetent jackass who had that job solely because he was the brother of the owner of the company, told him to ignore that shit. Tear off every goddamn cable if you have to. It was fucking hilarious to see him try to defend himself once the neighbors came out and demanded to speak to him. The office we had while working on that site was also interesting to say the least. See, it was this tiny office meant to house 20 people at most for safety reasons. We were never less than 50 people in there because we were only ever there to eat lunch. We had 30 minutes to all eat and eat our food, and we had only 2 microwaves for 50 people. Then we had only one once the other one got stolen. I wish I was making this shit up. Add to the fact that most of the hallways were nearly blocked by debris and assorted junk, and the fire escape was blocked by, and this is true, propane canisters, and the office was a death trap waiting to happen. Oh, and also there were no chairs or tables because they got stolen halfway into the first week we were on site. I don't want to point fingers, but I got a sneaking suspicion that it was one or more of the Latvians we worked alongside with who was the culprit. Then again, hell, given how hard they worked, damn near 24 hours a day, and how crappy the company was, I would say they had every right to steal some shit. Anyway, after 2 weeks me and the rest of the 17 or so people they had hired at the same time from the Public Employment Service and told each of us, are in private. I'm sorry, but I don't think you fit the way we work. At this point it was fairly obvious to all of us just what kind of company we were dealing with, and while we couldn't prove it, we were fairly certain that they got money for each of us. They hired and fired us as soon as possible afterwards. You may have noticed I always use past tense when I talk about the company. Well, that's because it no longer exists. See, once you begin to dig into the company you started to see a pattern of the company changing names more often than freaking Blackwater, and that it was owned by one company, that was owned by another company, and so on. At various lawsuits, investigations regarding their various shenanigans, and a ton of bad press, and eventually they just couldn't wriggle themselves out of it anymore and the company was forced to fold. And there was much rejoicing. Addendum. Dear fucking gods. I just noticed that they, like a cheap horror movie villain, has returned from the grave. Second addendum. Also, don't take my word for it. Their current score on Trustpilot is that 67% of their customers consider them very bad. Years ago when I finished uni, I applied to work at the Apple store and got invited to be interviewed. The interviews took place at a big hotel where everyone walked into a room with Apple employees clapping and cheering them. The interviews took around 2 hours. You'd be split into random groups and had to do things like come up with a new product or an advert for Apple and act them out in front of everyone. In the first interview we were all made to sign NDAs. We then had to fill in some other forms about experience, availability, etc. I noticed that, rather than saying tick in the box, it said to circle inside the box. Thought it was weird, looked around and couldn't see anyone that had picked up on it. I went ahead and circled inside the box. We all had to introduce ourselves with a fun fact, and I shit you not, a guy introduced himself with the fun fact that he got caught in the 2004 tsunami and saw loads of bodies float by. Got through to the second interview a week later, which included a one-on-one interview. This was the first time I got to talk about my skills. One of the guys that worked there had the Apple logo tattooed on him, which I thought was a bit too keen. Made it to the final interview. Had to prepare an A4 page about myself for this. Did some more group work, then had to wait to find out if I got the job. I didn't. They sent an email saying I had been unsuccessful and were unable to provide feedback. Found the whole process and the secrecy so weird. We were told multiple times we couldn't talk to anyone about this. I feel like they were doing little tests on you throughout the process, like seeing who picked up on circling inside the box. Really weird experience. I worked as a co-op student at a nuclear power plant right after the 2004 blackout that took out the entire eastern seaboard of North America. The plant I worked at was in the process of bringing a reactor back online right before the blackout hit, and as such had sensors in places that they normally wouldn't during normal operation, because they wanted data that didn't exist at the time about the behavior of a reactor coming online. Know what else they didn't have data on? A reactor emergency crashing to safe state because of a massive blackout on the grid. It resulted in terabytes of data. Each TXT file was 3 to 40 B, and there was a lot of them that none of the scientists I worked with had time to even look at themselves, because bringing the reactor back up was the higher priority. So guess what high school software engineering co-op student was put in charge of writing a script to sort through the raw data files? Me. The problem with that was not everyone realized that I was a high school student. They had made the mistake of thinking I was a university student, all of which had NDAs as part of their contracts, and the assumption was made that high school students wouldn't be given anything critical enough to work on to need one. So when they realized their mistake a month later, I was called by their legal team to sign an NDA and extend my security clearance to the appropriate level. Honestly, there's nothing now that I could actually tell you about the data that would mean anything interesting. The most interesting thing about it was I was the first person in the world to even look at that information. From my understanding, the script I wrote to calculate the averages and the maximum/minimum etc for every sensor that was hooked up to the reactor is actually still being used to make sense of it and create mathematical models of how it acted. Out of all the work I did while I was there, it was something quick I whipped up, nothing really special, but it's gotten the most use. I signed an NDA for a gaming company that I would never speak the owner's name and never make a comment about the studio or game. I worked there for 9 months, and with 2 other guys we built a children's online community game. Think Club Penguin. Every day was a nightmare, with the owner yelling at us that we weren't doing enough and fights over what was physically possible. This guy had no understanding of how game development works. He was upset with us because we didn't congratulate him on his new maturity. True story. After 9 months of hell, the company went tits up and lost funding. We never got our last paycheck. We were basically told we could take whatever in the office we wanted, so I took my development PC and left. 6 months later, I'm contacted by their lawyer saying that if I return my dev PC and sign an NDA saying I'll never besmirch the company or the owner, I'll get my final paycheck. The computer wasn't worth what I was owed, so I did it. They had apparently gotten some more funding and were setting up a new team. The only reason they made that deal with me was to get my updated character system that hadn't been fully integrated yet. Owner's brother shows up to collect the computer and hand over my check. He hands me the check. It's short $200, but at this point I don't care. I pocket the check and hand over the computer and say it was acting a little flaky, so I had to reformat it. The look on his face as I walked away was priceless. I didn't have to sign anything, as I was a little kid, but still an interesting story point. When I was probably 6 or 7, my mom got a call on our landline from someone who appeared to be a salesperson. Asked some random questions about whether she had kids, what age, interests, etc. Right before my mom got creeped out and hung up, he explained that he worked for DreamWorks and wanted to run some questions past her kid, me, about some potential movies, and she was welcome to listen in on the other handset for our landline phone, if that would make her more comfortable. Once I got on the phone, he asked me whether I preferred Pixar or DreamWorks, having no idea what those were at the time. I just said DreamWorks. He then asked me my thoughts on a movie potentially about a bunch of ninja animals, Kung Fu Panda, a group of monster superheroes fighting aliens, Monsters vs Aliens, and a movie about talking bugs, the Bee Movie. He thanked me and my mom for our time and asked me to please keep it a secret. Naturally, I ignored his plea for secrecy and told the whole school only for nobody to believe me. TL. Dr. Guy from DreamWorks called my house when I was a kid and interviewed me on my thoughts about movies that would be released within the next couple years. I signed an NDA to work for a legal marketing company, basically marketing services for returners and firms, that was founded by attorneys. It was pretty nice. Small office, easy commute, good salary, okay benefits, generous lunch breaks, 3 trips a year to conferences, held in high-class resorts in Vegas, LA, Boston, New York City, and future international travel was in the works. The problem? They were breaking employment law every damn day. Telling employees not to get pregnant because the owners of the company think maternity leave is a scam, for example, and making it clear that you would be fired if this happened. Telling employees that it is illegal to discuss compensation, which they know it is not. It is, in fact, illegal to prevent employees from discussing compensation and to punish them for doing so. Giving out raffle tickets for a day off instead of paying overtime or logging comp time. Telling employees that you could not fraternize between employment levels, no social discussions of any kind between creatives and managers, between managers and directors. That's not a legal issue, just incredibly oppressive and stupid management tactics. Being told to never bring your kids into the office, and then being forced to attend an art show by the COO's 7-year-old daughter that was set up in the conference room, and being expected to buy some of her shitty work. I don't even know if it's illegal, but it is a douchy slap in the face. I made a mild statement one day that I was surprised by one of their policies. I've never seen one like it before. My director, I was the manager, narrowed her eyes and gave me a cold stare, and I knew I was gone. Next week, they laid me off. They've never filled the position again, and they laid off half their sales staff too, so maybe it was just an excuse that allowed them to trim their human resources expenses. Whatever, I got a 6-month severance package and had another job in 6 weeks. I was glad to be out of there. I signed an NDA when I visited the set during filming season 2 of The Expanse. I couldn't talk about much of what I saw, which was all the filming sets, Eris Tunnel, Eris Dock Catwalk, Taicho Ops Center, Taicho Habitat Ring, Opa Boarding Pod, MCRN Sirocco Bridge / Corridor / Armory, UN War Room, Avasarala / Erin Wright's office, Rossin and Flight Deck / Armory / Medbay / Galley / Space. Between inner and outer hull, a few actors whose characters' fate was ambiguous in the previous season, several minutes of the first episode with unfinished VFX shots, VR sim of the Anubis reactor room, VFX tests of a sequence from the season 1 finale, costumes. Sadly I didn't get to see the Martian power armor in person, since it was covered up in the Sirocco Armory, but I saw the sequence with the Martian training team from the first episode, which was awesome. I also saw the filming of a scene in episode 4 at the Eris Dock Catwalk set, specifically when Miller and Iago are planting the nukes and the catwalk is hit by debris from the recently destroyed Mirasmus, and a scene on the Rosie as the gang talk to Miller. Fun fact, Casanva told me he usually reads the lines for whoever is on comms while he's up in his pilot seat, so they don't have to get the other actor on set or have a recording of the other side of the conversation on the day. The main cast was amazingly friendly and seemed as happy to meet me as I was to meet them. Steven Strait was eager to meet a fan. Dominique Tipper's smile lights up the room. Casanva is funny as hell. Wes Chatham is extremely friendly, and Thomas Jane is. Well, Thomas Jane. I chatted with him between takes and he asked where I was from and proceeded to tell me about picking blueberries by the side of the road with his grandparents. I worked for a call center in Canada. I was actually doing internet tech support for Comcast customers in the US. I assume I was not allowed to say where because callers would flip out at me all the time and they would probably try to hunt me down because they didn't have internet for 2 minutes. TL. Doctor, working in a call center suck. They are lowest level employee at the company and are treated the worst by callers and their own employers. More than 90% of calls, your internet is down. Unplug your modem. Wait. 10 seconds asterisk plug your modem back in. It's working now? Great. These calls were maximum 2 minutes. I'd get 200 plus calls per shift. If a call was longer than 2 minutes, 4 different managers would come by separately and chew me out for my poor performance. We weren't allowed to hang up on customers, even if they screamed swear words at us. If I hung up, 4 different managers would come by separately and chew me out for my poor performance. We got just over minimum wage, never 2 days off in a row, never the same 2 days week after week. For example, I'd get Tuesday and Sunday off one week, then next week would be Monday and Thursday. You'd only know your week's schedule 1 week prior. We were allowed to request schedule switches each year if you found an employee willing to switch days with you. It was impossible because everyone's days off were constantly moving around. You basically couldn't make any plans. I recall I wasn't allowed vacation days until a full year of employment. If you were sick, you had to call 4 different managers and get a doctor's note or else you'd get a warning. If you missed one of the 4 managers or didn't get a sick note 2 times, you would be fired with no severance because you had to sign a document agreeing to it to work there. The workplace sucked in general. No windows. There were over 1,000 people in this call center, not all working for Comcast, some for Yahoo, and others I can't recall. If I ever dared to put my lunch in the office fridges, it'd get stolen, and you weren't allowed to keep your lunch at your desk. You weren't allowed to have a bottle of water at your desk because it could ruin your computer. You could drink and eat on your breaks. You didn't have an assigned desk. It was first come, first serve. The desk space was slightly wider than your shoulders. There were short partition walls between computers, but you couldn't call them cubicles. The spaces were kind of like computer desks at a public library, but over 1,000 computers in a huge open space just in rows and rows. I only worked there for 4 months before I quit. The final straw was when a long-term employee showed me a stress ball he got as a reward for when the company made a $1 billion in profit that year. It was a stress ball that said thanks a million. I suppose they gave them to 1,000 employees, not even all the employees. My last day, I went in before my shift to talk to my direct supervisor, and it went something like this. I'd like to give my notice. I know I don't need to give any notice because I've only been here 4 months, but I'll work the rest of the week I'm scheduled for to make it easier for you guys. Supervisor, you're quitting? That's not very nice of you. Honestly, I don't want to be here now, and legally I don't have to give you any notice, so here's my badge. I quit and I'm leaving now. What? Did my supervisor want me to say, you're right, that wasn't nice of me. I'll work here until I die. I assume all call center employees are treated like this now, so I'm extra polite now when I call for support. I have 2 game-related NDAs PlanetSide. I was in the original alpha for the game before it even really had a name. I think I still have the discs they mailed me. I honestly don't know how I got selected. I just remember the LAN party my friends and I had for the beta, and I was able to explain a lot of things to them since my NDA was lifted. City of Heroes. Once again beta tester. But the NDA was not because of the beta, but because of a tifo of one of the devs. Apparently, during a fraction of time after an update, a dev had released the admin build in the patcher. Because of my internet speed, I never really noticed the larger download I had. When I booted up the game I noticed some small buttons that were different / moved, but didn't think anything about it. About 2 days later I get a phone call. My caller ID said Nxoft, producer of the game. It was a help desk person who basically explained the situation and asked if I would delete the entire game directory and reinstall. I kindly obliged and didn't think anything of it. About a week later, I got a large package in the mail. Cryptic sent me a dev team signed box copy of the game, which was due out a couple weeks later, a dev team signed poster, a letter from the dev team, some comic books, CD keys for other Microsoft games, a friend key for Coach and a yellow folder. The yellow folder had an NDA inside that I needed to sign and mail back. I kept all the gifts until after the servers closed and gave both of them to a good friend of mine. Still one of my favorite games. RIP. Paragon City. When I was in college, some friends and I got invited to watch some TV pilots of shows that might go on to air. We were supposed to review them and wouldn't get paid, but there was a chance for prizes. There were 2 really bad rom-coms with daytime soap opera actresses in them, and surprise, commercials. The commercials were also bad, so bad they were good, like they had a deodorant ad where they cut from a live actor to an animated graphic version of him with his arm up, and the deodorant stick rolling down his armpit. The funny part was the animated character still had his shirt on, so the stick was rolling down his clothes. Another commercial for the same deodorant had penguins instead of people, so the animated graphic was of a penguin with his flipper up. We got surveys to fill out after each of the TV shows, and surprise again, there were a lot of questions about the commercials. We figured that's really what they were testing, and I think I've seen the penguin commercial played. The prizes were just 4 cheap tools if they pulled your name out of a hat. The best part of the evening was my friend won both times they did the raffle. They thought we'd rigged the hat somehow. They gave us the prizes, but told us not come back. I was asked to give a brief lecture on the legality of kickbacks in real estate transactions. It was part of a how to flip houses seminar. What a fucking joke. I thought it was on the up and up, but it was a scam for idiots. The guy doing the presentation wanted me to pay the $1,500 tuition for the first one when I arrived, because he'll be learning my secrets. I told him I'd been a broker for 20 years and I'd flipped houses for over a decade. I already knew his secrets. He was all upset that I wouldn't pay, and I told him I'd just leave, because the second I arrived and saw his materials, I realized I was part of some scammy bullshit. Then he asked me what I was going to say about kickbacks. Yes, at the event, not before. I gave him my speech outline. He read it and said, no, just tell them it's okay to do kickbacks and bribes, but don't call them bribes. Say shit like grease the wheels or something. I asked for my $300 up front. He paid me. He made me sign an NDA, so I wouldn't profit off his secrets. When it was my turn, I went up and basically told everyone what you can and can't do for kickbacks. If you have a real estate license you can do this. If you don't have a license, you can do ABC, but not QRS. The guy running it was livid. In the end, about 2 years later, the guy running it was arrested for taking bribes. He'd become a city zoning official by that point. So, what can I tell you that I couldn't when the NDA was intact? Here's the guy's how to flip houses seminar in a nutshell. Find cheap house. Use hard money loan at 18%. To buy house. Use hard money loan at 18%. To pay for materials and labor to rehab house. Get house appraised. Call realtor sell house for $10,000. Under appraised value to unload it fast, because you can't afford another 18% extension on the hard money loan. Rents. Repeat and surprise, he owned the hard money loan place he was pushing. It had a $3,500 non-refundable loan application fee. And his brother was the appraiser he was pushing. And his sister was a realtor. His brother was a lawyer, but I was stepping in for brother, because brother had an emergency. Huge scam. I took off after that. I signed an NDA for a new game title that was going to be released by a game company I honestly heard nothing about. I found it random, since the alpha test was sent through my email. I have honestly no idea why they sent it to me, or how they got my email. Turns out the game was by a company called Epic Games, and the game was a build em up 4-player co-op called Fortnite. Did I buy Fortnite? No. Have I played the free-to-play battle royale? No. They never interested me. Maybe Save the World would have if it was cheaper. Ironically, they called the first version I tried .1 and slowly upgraded every testing period to odd 2 and so on. I lost track of the game after odd 3 as I think they moved on to new testers or switched management. I'm not sure. The game had its core mechanics done, enemy waves, building, even the neat design feature where you can change how a wall will pop up by removing one of the 3x3 tiles. Neat stuff. The people were fun to play with and the devs were nice people. I think we communicated over TeamSpeak, but I was young, so I might be remembering that wrong. They actually sent me a nice gold medal with Epic Games on one side and Fortnite on the other, stating I was one of the 500 original testers. There were NPCs you had to rescue in broken missions. Most of them were either a T-posing kid or woman enveloped by a blue bubble, almost similar to the aura weapons or items give off. I ran it on a crap laptop that was never meant for gaming, so I will say that the biggest surprise is that the game had very good graphics, and even in its alpha stages, the game ran freakishly smooth. I was surprised that my laptop wasn't spewing molten lava from the fan, and that I had none to little FPS lag. I later realized Epic Games made the Unreal Engine, so it made complete sense after that point. There of course was never talk of a switch to different game modes, PvP or the like. But considering their undeniably good optimization, I'd be damned if I ever said I would see that game running on phones. That's opportunity jumping at its finest. TBH, Fortnite changed the game for all games. I find it funny that it wasn't the original concept, its kook genre, or its super unique mechanics. It was the Uber optimization that lets the game run on anything, even your phone. Not to mention riding that battle royale, low wait time, instant PvP, hype. Visiting Novels HQ in Provo, representing a vendor, and saw Network 4.11 running on a Power PC. They specifically told me it was covered under the generic NDA I signed. Microsoft was not as interesting. I saw a room full of Windows 95 computers in various states of reboot and automated test running. It was really groundbreaking, amazing stuff at the time. Other NDAs I've had to sign were not at all interesting, except the one for my clearance, and that one never expires. The one for my current employer is on a secret forecasting model, which is part of their intellectual property, and I checked it out in the source repo and looked up the related academic papers. We implemented it wrong, so it's not actually doing what they think it's doing. And when I went to file the bug report, I found that there was already one, and it was 5 years old, hadn't been put on any roadmap. And it's not particularly secret. I wouldn't be able to name it or mention anything material about it in public until 12 months after termination of employment, which is soon. Few years ago I was an editor in a gaming related magazine. I wrote reviews about good and or shitty games. I also was evaluator for a very tiny publisher. That means I played games that were offered to them to get published. It's kinda common to use cheats or cheat engine to get faster through a game to see the end game story wise, aka how the story evolves, especially when between getting the review build and release date are just a few days. When I worked as an editor, just for single player games, mostly RPGs or strategy games etc. One day, I logged into Battlefield 4 to play some matches and got somehow banned because of using cheats. I never cheat on my games and definitely not in multiplayer games, so I was surprised. Contacted Punkbuster. They said I cheated. I wanted proof from them. They refused. I researched a bit and found out that Punkbuster is not only scanning all running programs, but also installed programs. Their logic: you have cheat engine installed, you are a cheater and you will be banned. I again contacted Punkbuster and demanded lifting the ban or else I will contact my lawyer. They refused. So I contacted my lawyer and he tried, and again, Punkbuster refused. So we contacted EA and demanded the lift of my ban because having cheat engine installed is neither proof of cheating nor illegal. EA also refused because they said that they can't give orders to Punkbuster, they are not part of EA etc. Well, German law wasn't on their side. To make that story short, EA was forced to force Punkbuster to lift the ban. EA had also pay my lawyer in compensation. Worked for a mobile game company doing customer service. Our biggest game at the time wasn't super special, just one of those zoo type games, but attached to a strong license that people like. Get creatures, Place them in your game and farm the rewards. We would host these events every other weekend, where you could get special characters for your game. The characters that would be on the docket were almost always the ones you had to pay real money, hard cash, instead of in-game currency, soft cash, to get them. Naturally, people would go nuts and spam try to get them. Here's the catch. They made them almost impossible for you to get. You'd try and get the message, try again in 4 hours. Or speed up time, and try again now for X amount of hard cash. The odds were so incredibly low that it was disturbing. If you waited, you'd just get 6 tries in a weekend event, so it rarely worked out. If you paid hard cash, you wouldn't have better odds, just more tries. It was just made to siphon money out of people's pockets. I hated working there. It was always so scummy. Low quality games with a license tied to it, so people picked it up. Easy cash grab, that was it. Point my NDA was just because I had health issues and asked for options on working from home /etc. And they just sent me home with a nice settlement because they didn't want to deal with that shit. Can't blame them. My health is worse now. They're still making me free to play licensed games, so I don't know who's worse off, tbh. I worked for a photography studio that was basically a bunch of photographers working for slave wages, and the company went out and did all the sales and marketing and such. It wasn't a bad deal, but I signed a no-compete and NDA that has since expired. I left because I was given a checklist at every wedding or event of things that were included in the package that was purchased, and over again I would take extra pictures because I would see something artistic or a moment that needed to be captured. Or someone would ask me to take pictures of something, and I would point. I would first get yelled at when I turned in my edited work to the company, and then my work that was off package wouldn't get filtered down to the customer. So after about 8 years I left, then had to wait 24 months to work on my own, which killed my client base. Which thankfully, it was my part-time job, and I could survive anyhow. I built it back up and now I'm phasing out of it entirely. But here's what you need to know. If you are shopping around for a photographer, and you don't know anyone personally, always ask the venue for recommendations. They keep tabs on who comes through and who does the best work, because it is in their interest to have the best work done of their venue. If you find yourself in a studio looking at packages and what's included in the package, I'd leave. A good photographer will work out an outline of the event with you and a timeline for where he or she will be and when and doing what. They won't have a clipboard that says bride and bride's mother, groom and groom's mother, then refuse to take a picture if anyone else walks up. That's crap. After taking a job, just to have a job at a small company in the South, within 6 months, I found better employment. It's always been easier to get a job if you're currently employed for some reason. Feeling a little guilty for using them, I offered to hire and train my replacement as an assistant to the VP. While interviewing candidates, I came across a wonderful woman who was way overqualified for the position, but was well qualified for an opening I knew we had in the accounting department. She was very smart, personable, and had a great personality. Here's where it gets hairy. The company only had 10 employees, all white. The job candidate was African American. I contacted Dawn in the accounting department and told her I had an excellent candidate for the opening there. So, the candidate went to her office and then came walking out in about 2 minutes, very fast and out. I went to Dawn's office, sort of WTF. Dawn said, with her heavy southern accent. We can't have her asking the VP questions like some illiterate. I went to the VP and asked why we wouldn't hire a smart wonderful person, because they have a local and cultural accent. He, with his NC heavy accent said, and I kid you not, that we couldn't have people with strong accents answering the phone at the company, only neutral. I told him that I had just moved back from New York City, where his accent would have been considered along the lines of Dumbus Lil Abner in Dogpatch, and that he and Dawn were being racist. He shrugged me off. I went to the president and he denied it was racist, and reminded me of my NDA. I was young, ignorant, and poor. Still regret not calling that woman and telling her about it. If that had happened, now that I've gained some wisdom with age, I wouldn't hesitate to help her make a case. That was my last day, and I didn't help hire and train a new person after that BS. This guy had me sign one for his design for what would essentially be cars that never need fuel. One example was placing the spiral style wind vanes on the sides of semis. As the semi would drive, the associated wind would generate electric, which in turn would drive motors at the wheels. The other part was to use a contactless essentially generator at each wheel to produce power as the car was driving along. I was super excited to get in on the ground level of a new car design, and if lucky get stupid rich. I was nearing graduation with an engineering degree. Then I got to see the design. Basically he ignored physical laws and designed a system that would give you a new loss. He said things like, well, a motor is like 97% efficiency, and since there are 4 you would end up being 388% efficient. He did not understand that putting a small wind turbine on a vehicle would mean that the vehicle's engine would have to overcome this drag. So the inefficiency of the turbine, motor, battery, and so on would all combine for a decent loss. In other words, he designed a really stupid looking car with unnecessary fuel efficiency reductions. Later in he calls me talking about these super fast electrical switches. Now he wants to trap electric between two switches by rapidly opening and closing a pair of these switches so that the electric would have to keep trying to trick it so it turns around and go the other way while going across the load many times over. This guy managed to get investors even. Was not his first pump and dump scheme point. All I got from this was a meal at Bob Evans and a good laugh. I worked for Glamour Shots in the mid 2000s. Yeah, that Glamour Shots, if you're from the US, where all the cringe-worthy photos of preteens with feathered boas and too much makeup got their start. That place was a shitshow from the local level through to the corporate level. Point those massive framed photos all over the walls. Overpriced specials pitched to every single customer. Even those who didn't buy anything and just took the free makeover by completely unqualified makeup artists / hair artists using cheap and bacteria-ridden makeup and 8x10 print used to bait people into a sitting. We even had a script to follow. Hey customer, it's Pancrease from Glamour Shots at Depressing Ass Mall. So, my area manager was in and he was looking over everyone's photo shoots and he absolutely loved yours. I wanted to offer you a special deal on repeat for every sitting. Point I did feel badly that people were genuinely flattered until I got my first paycheck and realized that the commission rates were worth the lies. My particular store was run by a person with some serious issues. He often slept in the store. Not professional to have your manager's personal toiletries on display in the toilets, but whatever, and loved to be inappropriate with female staff. There was no actual management or training of any staff. We were just thrown in and it was sink or swim. Point one day, the photographer didn't show up. I had never used a DSLR before this point, so I thought, what the hell, I'll try it. Besides, I couldn't sell any photos if none were taken. So, at least I can thank them for my love of photography now. I mean, other than the 10-hour days of not leaving the studio room because sittings and staff were so poorly managed, but at least I realized my talent there. Point the owners, I think the wife's name was Ricky, husband was Joe, were a mess. I had the great displeasure of meeting them a few times. They were wholly unqualified to operate any kind of business and it's no wonder their business absolutely tanked. Their upper management had such utter disregard for the staff in the stores, it was unbelievable. I received a phone call to instruct the PNs to clean the store windows. That was quite telling. I also had them take over my computer remotely in the middle of a sales presentation, and when I tried taking back control, had a message pop up on the screen saying, who the fuck is this? So professional. Oh. And we were told to quickly close sales and run the credit cards because the store had a no refunds policy. When you put high emotions, high pressure sales, and exhaustion, as we were always running behind, together people tend to make rash decisions. I had many sales of over $1,000 that customers nearly immediately changed their minds about, and I was under no circumstances to ever cancel the purchase, even if the check was still in my cash drawer. Not an NDA, but worked at a call center for a major phone service provider. I dealt with only existing customers as it was a sales center that tried to upsell packages and sister company services. Two interesting things from working that job. The training dictated that English-speaking departments could not, by policy, help a customer with the bill being in Spanish, and no one knew how to toggle the written billing statement between languages. I witnessed numerous transfers of English-speaking youth whose parents set up the account as complete Spanish speakers, but the kids weren't comfortable dealing with it all in Spanish. They didn't want to be transferred, but we had no choice, and I imagine the experience went in reverse for Spanish speakers with English bills. I found the toggle button that switches the billing language instantly, and attempted to end the vicious circle of transferring. I've actually been helped since, and trained agents on how to do just this, because there was no documentation or training for it, and I'm pretty sure it still goes on today. Another interesting thing that happened involved me being pulled aside to be fired. I was caught gaming sales in exchange for refunds, but my use of one policy vs the other legitimized my tactics, which is why I feel fine sharing it. Ultimately, customers had overage charges they were unhappy with, charges that could be alleviated going forward with the purchase of certain tech. They were taking the necessary steps to resolve their billing issues by picking up a service that they needed. Something Wi-Fi something. I went from almost being fired to having my tactic become part of the sales training. Worked in sales for a membership-based spa. Catch. The membership and retail product prices were pretty much only based on how much we could trick the consumer into paying for them. Example, our top tier, all-inclusive membership was $99 a month, but if we were afraid a consumer wouldn't buy a membership at that price, but figured we could get a sale at any rate, we were pretty much given free range to charge whatever we wanted for whatever service. For example, one person might walk out paying $99 MO for all-inclusive services, only because they didn't try to haggle or put up a fight about the price. Another person who did decide to haggle or put up a fight might get the same benefits for $49/MO. This also applied to retail products at a location. Something might retail at $130, but if you were running the store that day and decided you could for sure sell that product for a little cheaper, you could make up a sale or even a coupon at checkout to make that product a more desirable impulse buy. Example, I see you're eligible for a one-time 50% coupon to go towards retail. That lotion you have your eye on would only be about $70. If we applied that, and another person might walk out with that same product for $30. As long as we didn't go under wholesale price, the amount the store paid for the item, we were in the clear to make up our own prices. Just depends on how badly your salesman/woman wants their commission. TL. Doctor, salespeople make prices up. I signed on to a volunteer-only 3D animated fan project. I did most of the lip syncing and some of the models in the early stages of production. I was not to discuss anything related to the film to anyone not actively involved in it, like it was some Avengers level box office hit. I want to preface this next bit by saying that the director and producer of the film was, and is, by all means, a really good guy. He had a genuine passion for this project and wanted to share his and his friends' writing through a 12-minute movie. However, he had zero experience in directing and producing. There was no storyboard, there was no deadline, so progress was extraordinarily slow, and his idea of boosting morale was holding weekly meetings on Discord that consisted of him talking for upwards of an hour, normally repeating stuff he said the last meeting, or even stuff he had said 10 minutes ago. He really loved to hear himself talk. He brought on upwards of 75 people on board, including artists, writers, animators like myself, and PR people. Every single one of them were amateurs, not to say they didn't have talent. On top of that, maybe 10 people, excluding the voice actors, were actively involved in the project. The entire process lasted 3 years, and the end result was disappointing to say the least. The pacing was horrible, the movements were stiff as hell, and it was what you would expect from a source filmmaker product. The video is on YouTube with a 10-month total of 2,500 views. It was a failure, no question. On top of that, I was promised by the director, despite it being a volunteer project, that I would be paid for my contribution due to the difficulty and tedious nature of animating lip syncing. I've yet to see a damn cent. It ruined my passion for animating, and I've just stuck to focusing on my day job.